Welcome to the New York City Bar Association podcast. Opinions expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the city bar.
Welcome to Mindful Lawyering, a podcast of the Mindfulness and Wellbeing and Law Committee of the New York City Bar Association. My name is Jordana Confino, and I'm a former practicing attorney and founder of JC Coaching and Consulting, a company devoted to helping lawyers and law students achieve greater satisfaction and sustainable success in their lives and work. I'm also an adjunct professor at Fordham Law School, where I teach courses on positive lawyering and peer mentoring and leadership. On today's episode, I'm joined by Robbie Margolius, Director of Wellbeing at Arnold and Porter, who is also a former practicing attorney who spent considerable time advising lawyers and law students in both law school and law firm settings on their career development. Today, Robbie and I will be talking about caregiver fatigue and strategies that caregivers can use to care for others without compromising their ability to care for themselves. We will close with a 5-minute self-compassion meditation led by community member Nancy Batterman, Deputy General Counsel at the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. But before we dive in, I think it's worth sharing with our listeners. Robbie, how did we even get to be hosting this topic today?
So outside of our professional roles, we're both caregivers. I myself have 3 children who have mostly reached adulthood. They are between 22 and 17. And they would not like me saying it, but I have parents who are considered elderly. They're all approaching 80 plus. And I've had the opportunity, thankfully not so often, to help them and my spouse and our siblings care for them. But I think also, if you look around, we're all caregivers of some kind. And so it's important to just recognize that in ourselves and how many caregiving roles we play and sort of pick that up in other people.
Yeah, absolutely. I identify with that so much just in the various professional capacities I've had as a professor and student counselor in law school, and even as a coach now. I see myself falling into or just intentionally stepping into caregiver roles all the time with that, as well as just with friends. And then also in my own family, as I and other members of my family have gotten older, and especially as I've had other family members struggle with both physical and mental health challenges, I've been thrust into the role of caregiver, sometimes at times when I was not expecting it. And then now I am expecting to be stepping into a new caregiver role literally any minute, day, or week now, as I anticipate the arrival of my new baby girl. So yeah, this is a topic that I know is close to both of our hearts, and which I'm sure impacts virtually all of our listeners in one way or another, whether or not they've even recognized it up until this point. So I'm so
very
excited.
Timely and exciting.
Exactly. So before we dive in, last disclaimer, I just want to emphasize that neither I nor Robbie will be giving medical advice in this podcast. And the most important takeaway that we can share is that if you're experiencing caregiver fatigue or burnout or any sort of mental health challenge, the most important thing is that you take steps to get help and support for yourself. So launching in, Robbie, what is caregiver fatigue and why is everyone talking about it recently, and how does it show up?
So there's lots of definitions of caregiver fatigue, caregiver burnout. It's really all about the exhaustion, emotional, mental, physical exhaustion that can happen when we dedicate time and energy to managing the health and safety of someone other than ourselves. So caregivers of elderly parents, that's sandwich generation who are getting it from both sides, people who care for their friends or their colleagues. But it's really that feeling of being tired, stressed, withdrawn, anxious, even depressed. It can impact us in lots of different ways. As I said, physical, can be psychological impact, financial impact, and social impacts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like this is a topic that has come into focus recently. And we recently saw there was a report by the Surgeon General on this. Why are we talking about this now all of a sudden, do you think?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the Surgeon General's report, the advisory that they published in 2024 called Parents Under Pressure. And I think one of the reasons that we're talking about it, that the highest levels of our medical professionals are talking about it, is because studies show that more than 60% of caregivers experience symptoms of burnout. That can look like the signs and symptoms of stress, anxiety, depression, being irritable, that feeling of hopelessness amongst this population of people who are responsible for caring for other people. So if I'm pulling back to the Surgeon General's report, which I think is really, really interesting, if you haven't had a chance to read it, you can find it online. Again, it's called Parents Under Pressure. The report notes that on top of the traditional challenges of parenting, and the report does focus on parenting rather than other caregiving, the idea that you have to protect children from harm, we're worrying about paying for their education or their support and upkeep, managing teenagers who are searching for independence, and I can talk about that for a long time based on my own experiences, but there's lots of new pressure and stressors that previous generations might not have had to consider, like social media, the growing mental health crisis. Another thing that the Surgeon General talks about is this growing loneliness epidemic, which tends to impact young people, parents, and other caregivers more than others. And then there's this intensifying culture of comparison. Am I doing enough as a caregiver, and how that impacts us? Facts that I think are really important from the study from the Surgeon General. 33% of parents in this study that was done in 2023, 33% of parents reported high levels of stress within the past month. And that may not seem like a lot, but compared to other adults, that level is at 20%. And then when we're talking about acute stress, so stress that rises to the level of impeding your ability to function, 41% of parents say that most days they're so stressed they can't function. And 48% say that their stress is completely overwhelming. When you look at other adults, or have those figures at half, really in the 20s. And so I think that's really why we and so many other people are talking about this. It's a growing and acutely growing issue in society at large. And I think we're going to talk about in the legal profession particularly.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it's almost an extension of the fact that all of a sudden in the past 5 to 8 years, we started recognizing the prevalence and importance of addressing mental health challenges and well-being challenges in general. And now we're moving beyond just the general towards specific manifestations and specifically vulnerable populations, including in areas where I think maybe we're less likely to recognize this as a really important problem that should be addressed, as opposed to like, oh, this is just what it means to be a caregiver. And I'll add one more thing that I've just been thinking about myself as I, again, anticipate stepping into this new role. I feel like in the past 10 years, I've just been getting a handle on my own mental health and well-being. And notwithstanding all of the other caregiver roles that I mentioned that I've had so far, assuming this new one and this massive one, it's just a massive piece of the limited pie that I have for time and energy. And I think figuring out how to reconcile work and life and caring for ourselves and caring for others with each additional person that we add to care for, it just becomes even more challenging. That makes so much sense to me. And why do you think this is so hard to address, especially in the legal profession? Because again, I feel like whenever we're having these talks about mental health and well-being, we're recognizing like, yeah, these are pervasive problems that impact people across industries. But again, I feel like in the legal profession, there are some challenges that make it particularly hard for lawyers and members of the profession.
And I think we're going to talk about, again, we're focusing on lawyers. This is a New York City Bar podcast. And That's not to say that other professions don't experience these types of stressors impacting them. But, in the legal profession, we're talking about an intellectually challenging environment. It can be an emotionally challenging environment with the kinds of work that we take on if you're working, particularly if you're working in family law or there's a personal injury involved or criminal law, right? And so those challenges are inherent in the work. But we're also talking about a profession where we've been trained to focus on the risk. We've been trained to focus on reason, to approach our work with a level head and sometimes detached from the emotional pieces that are surrounding us. And so that comes into play when we're talking about the stress of the profession. We're also, I think, harking back to our time as practicing lawyers, it's a service profession. You are responsible for client service, and other people are demanding your time. They are very needy of your services in many cases, right? Their personal lives, their professional lives are relying on you and the work that you bring. And we could talk about this for a long time, but there's the workload. The workload. It is demanding. There's only 24 hours in the day, and some of them you should be spending sleeping and eating and taking care of yourself, let alone socializing, exercising, and all the other things on our to-do list. And so that can create sort of a lack of space to process emotions, process those feelings that come with caring for others as a professional and perhaps in your personal life.
Absolutely. It's funny. I was laughing to myself when you said that we're trained to sometimes detach from emotions. I feel like we're trained to mostly detach from emotions when we're doing our work, both with respect to our work itself and just in general, so that we can get our work done. And I can't tell you how many students and clients have come to me being like, I just need to compartmentalize because I just need to keep going one thing in front of the other. I don't have time to process this right now. And that can be okay if you're trying to get through like one trial or one final exam period. But if this is an ongoing situation, that will just inevitably compound the problem by causing things to bubble over and resulting in burnout. And I think that's just the confluence of those factors really, when they come together, make this such an intense problem, because we're trained to be invulnerable and not look for support because we're the supporters. And as we said at the beginning, the most important thing here is if you're struggling, get support.
Yeah. And one other thing you were talking about with detachment, we are really in this day and age have a very difficult time detaching. Technology, the always on culture, the always on availability doesn't allow us often to detach. We live attached to our devices. We're wearing them. Sometimes we're sleeping with them. They're constantly pinging and trying to get our attention. And that doesn't allow us for time to kind of step back and breathe and have that downtime and have that quiet time. And then it's also that technology is pushing sort of world events into our space as well, which can be incredibly challenging and give us this feeling that we don't have a lot of control. And I think it's really important. This part of what we were doing when we were planning for this discussion was really wanting to acknowledge and validate that these feelings are real and that you're not alone.
Yeah, completely. And I feel like with just the reference to the news there, we veer into compassion fatigue, which is separate and related to caregiver fatigue in many ways. And again, for lawyers who are fixers right now, I think it's coming at us from all angles for sure.
That's true. But we know there's a problem. And I'd love to spend more time on how we can help ourselves with that problem, as opposed to keep reiterating and rehashing the negative. Let's talk about what we can do to build the positive.
Yes, absolutely. And there's so many things that we can do, but I think if I had to just boil it down to some of the most essentials, I think two immediate first steps come to mind. And the first one is I say just easier said than done. But the first one is removing the pressure on ourselves to be able to please absolutely everyone and do absolutely everything perfectly and fully and completely in every single realm of our life. Because this, and I recognize caregivers we have lots of external pressures being applied on us. I'm not trying to minimize that at all. But we also then impose this internal expectation and obligation to do all of the things wholly and completely. And this inevitably just compounds the strain and exhaustion that so many of us experience. And this isn't just contained to caregivers. This is really a hallmark of, I would say, perfectionism in general, which is extremely, extremely pervasive in the legal profession and has been linked with both mental health challenges and burnout. And that's the case even when you're not a caregiver in any capacity. But what I've found with so many of the lawyers or perfectionist lawyers in particular that I've worked with is that when you add on caregiving, this can be the straw that breaks the camel's back because it just intensifies the expectations and the magnitude that you're expecting that you could handle. And I want to be clear here that when I say we have these perfectionist expectations, it's not about the level, the standards, or the quality of excellence that we're aiming for. The difference between perfectionists and what I like to call optimalists or big picture perfection seekers is that perfectionists reject reality when they're establishing their expectations and their goals for themselves. And so they tell themselves that as long as they work hard enough and as long as they work quickly enough and as long as they're good enough, they should be able to have the world's biggest pie and carve it up exactly perfectly to attend to everything that they want to do for everyone in every realm of their life. And that's just not possible. And the problem is that we tell ourselves that, all right, well, if we shoot for absolute perfection, we aim for the moon, and worst case, we land upon the stars. It doesn't actually work that way, because what it prevents us from doing is making intentional trade-offs about how to allocate our precious time, energy, and focus. And so we end up just completely depleting ourselves, trying to do everything, and maybe not even doing the most important things in the way that we want to. And this goes hand in hand with people pleasing. So we want to be able to say yes to everyone and everything all the time, or even volunteer. And this comes into caregiving a lot. We take it on ourselves to do these things because we think that the trade-off is either don't do it and disappoint someone in the short term, or somehow make everything work and disappoint absolutely no one. Again, we're rejecting reality because what we're not letting ourselves see here is that that's not actually the choice on the table, because we can't do everything for everyone all at once. And so the actual choice is saying no, or dropping some things for now to focus on other things, or trying to push ourselves, inevitably overextending ourselves, and end up disappointing someone because we don't show up the way that we want to in every exact sphere of life, or disappointing ourselves because we feel like we haven't shown up or we've burned ourselves into the ground here. And so I would say the first step here is accepting this unfortunate reality that we can't do everything for everyone all at once. And what that enables us to do is step back and say, how can we achieve big picture perfection or big picture people pleasing, saying, how can we achieve the best possible outcome? How can we further the things that are most important for me to accomplish here, given the actual realistic constraints? And so here I would suggest using our values as our compass. So what's actually most important to us, and how can we best honor that, even recognizing that we're going to have to let other things go? And so I would say that's the first step. And because, as I said, a lot easier said than done, the second step, and the tool that I always say that I had to give anyone only one tool, whether they want to enhance their well-being or their professional performance or anything else, I would give them self-compassion. And I would say practicing self-compassion as you make these trade-offs, because it's going to be hard. And these trade-offs aren't easy. Even when you know you're making the best possible decision to honor your values, you will very most likely still feel like you're not doing enough and experience the pain, shame, guilt, disappointment that goes with that. And in those instances, I think lawyers in particular are wired to beat ourselves up, either in order to motivate ourselves to work harder and do better, or to punish ourselves for not doing well enough so that we remember and do it better next time. And here I'll just say there's so much research that shows that as counterintuitive as that is, it is so counterproductive to beat ourselves up in those times, and practicing self-compassion by giving ourselves grace and treating ourselves as we would a dear friend in our shoes, by responding with kindness and encouragement and understanding. Not only is that linked with lower caregiver burnout, and there are studies specifically on that point, it's also linked with higher performance and higher resilience. And so I would say we can't avoid the pain that comes with making these trade-offs, but we can control whether we respond to it by adding insult to injury or showing ourselves some kindness there, which will not only help us feel better, but also actually fortify us and enable us to do better for and care for others more effectively.
The New York City Bar Association is a dynamic community of over 23,000 legal practitioners. Members shape the future of the legal profession, serve the public, and gain an edge in their careers. To learn more about becoming a member of the City Bar or to join today, visit nycbar.org/join. Save 20% on semi-annual dues when you join. Call Customer Relations at 212-382-6663 and use code POD24.
I think it's really interesting what you just said. When we're teaching new skills, particularly to children, we'll often employ a star chart, right? For every time that they've done something that we want them to do, brush their teeth, put their clothes away, did their homework on time, we'll give them a star and we'll reward them for the positive behaviors. But we don't often do that to ourselves.
Yeah, we don't.
We're just picking up on what we're not doing enough of, as opposed to when we're showing up and how we're showing up and the efforts that we're putting in.
Oh, absolutely. And this is why I think just one way to counter that is when you get to the end of each day, write down 3 things that you're proud of yourself for, because undoubtedly you come away with a laundry list of the things you didn't get to and completely just disregard the things that you did. And I will say that so often caregivers in particular will disregard so many ways that they just show up for the people that they're caring for. And those don't even seem like accomplishments to them. All they see are the tasks on the to-do list, which in going back to the values question, the tasks on the to-do list are often not the most important thing. It's how we were present with someone. And I think, we don't give ourselves nearly enough credit and just walk away thinking, I did terrible today. And the worst part is that we think that that's going to motivate us to do better tomorrow. And the opposite is true. We're just deflating and exhausting ourselves and actually taking any wind out of our sails that would have carried us through doing the things that we wanted to do tomorrow.
I love that.
So I just outlined some of the internal facing things that we can do, but how can we look to others to help alleviate some of the responsibilities and the sense of overwhelm that we feel as caregivers? We're just fatigued, or we're already at the point of burnout.
We need to be open to asking for and accepting help. It's not something that many caregivers, many lawyers, frankly, are open to doing, right? We have colleagues, we might ask them questions, but at the end of the day, it can be somewhat of a solitary profession. You're writing the brief, you're drafting the contract, you're kind of out there on your own. And so really to be open to the idea of asking for and then accepting the help, it's probably the same help that you would offer to give someone else. Readily, gladly. It's just really important that we can't do it all, as you said, Jordana, we can't do it all at the same time. And we don't have to do it alone. So really just thinking about, again, asking for and accepting help. Who can help you, right? Hopefully, there's lots of different people. If you open up your eyes and look around, if you have a partner, if you have family members, whether they be nearby or far away, just someone who you can talk to about your burdens to just sometimes get some of that off your chest, or family members or friends who can come and help you. So your social professional circle, your community, those can be some outsourced resources, right? Thinking about, as you say, our values, where do we put our financial values? Who can help us with certain things if that avenue is available to us, and it's not always available to us? Who can help you either by bringing in someone to help you with some of the to-dos that are on your list, or to help you with your caregiving responsibilities? And frankly, if it's not available financially, how can you trade off? I'll watch the kids one day, you'll watch the kids another day. Often when I see people who have the responsibility of visiting an elderly family member in a nursing home or a rehab facility, there's usually someone else or a community group that is available on the roster to maybe visit one day. And sometimes we just have to ask those questions to figure out who can help you during those times.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think, like you said, going back to the values, and this is going to vary for different people. What is your highest and best use in each role? And then how can you delegate or get help for the other stuff? And again, this isn't going to be the same for everyone, but I'm just thinking, and again, I'm very much anticipating new baby brain right now as I try to wrap my head around all of the different things that go into caring for a baby. There's once they start eating food, I could spend time making infant food from scratch and mashing vegetables, or I could spend that time on something else. And so similarly, I know that there's so many working parents who feel so much guilt because they're not cooking a big meal every night when they get home from work. And there's some people who adore cooking and that brings them peace and joy. I'm putting that aside. I know so many people who are like, oh, well, I make the dinner. I feel like I have to make the dinner, but then I don't even see my kid because I'm spending so much time stressed in making dinner. And so if that hour of presence would feel more values aligned for you, then cooking, look into alternatives, whether it's meal prep kits, whether it's some form of takeout or trading off getting someone to help. Again, this can look so many different ways, but I think that it's far too easy to internalize all of the shoulds and tell ourselves, well, I have to do everything or I'm not a good fill in the blank. And I think there, of course, we would want to do everything if we could. But if we can't, what is the highest and best use? And often the problem is we'll default to doing the most immediately urgent or obvious thing at the expense of the highest and best use because, again, at the end of the day, reality tends to insist on continuing to be reality as hard as we work to make it not so.
Well, one of the things I think can be really helpful is in a quiet moment, creating the wish list of where your highest and best value isn't, or where you're not connected to it, or if it doesn't uplift you. So again, coming back to how people need to know how they can help you, create your wish list. It's kind of like an Amazon wish list.
Yeah.
Or a gift registry, right? Like if you think about the ways people can help you so that when they ask, especially in times of crisis, right? There's someone you're caring for, a family member who had a health crisis or something really radically changed and you are all of a sudden pulled into a different direction. It's really important to have ways where someone else can easily step in for you, where your exact presence isn't required. So that could be anything from meal prep to driving the carpool or picking up the mail or just all of these different things. And sometimes those are friends who are helping you. And sometimes those are service providers who are helping you. Sometimes it's the community that's helping you. But really thinking about those things. And then, of course, I shouldn't say we always, but in my community, we do that when someone's having a baby. We create a meal chain and people sign up to create meals or drop off things and do things for the new baby. And it's a really exciting event. But, sometimes something will flare up and you're going to need to ask for help. And having that circle around you, knowing who those people are when you need them. It's similar to putting those names on in case of emergency forms that you fill out. Really thinking about who those people are and making sure they know how they can help you and how you can come back and help them. I think it's really hard for people for whom it's hard to ask for help, understanding that you would be reciprocating, not that it's a give and take transaction, but sort of being upfront that you would say to yourself or actually say to this other person, thank you for helping me, or please, can you help me? I would be there for you. And I look forward to the day when I can do it. Can kind of help us feel a little bit better about that asking for help.
I'll just say there's so much research that shows the well-being benefits of doing a kindness for others. And I'll even just say that there was one of my neighbors recently was having a hard time, and I knew that, and I took it on myself to put together these care packages for her, and it made me feel so good. And so again, you're almost giving a gift to people in letting them do that for you as well. And I think we never even think about it that way.
So that's an example of like what's within your control. And I think that's important to think about, like what's within your sphere of control. What are the kinds of things you can focus on? What are the goals that you can reach? And that's an important way to think about our self-care as well, right? We're talking about getting help from others and helping other people, but it's really also important to think about the connection between our self-care and the care that we can provide for others. So it's that oxygen mask scenario. You've got to put on your oxygen mask first in order to help other people. One of the other scenarios I think about is often lawyers will talk about like, I'm burning the candle at both ends. Well, at some point, if you continue to do that, there will be no wick left. There will be no light. And so getting to that point before you have run out of your light is really important. And moments of self-care, they don't have to be extravagant big things. They can be small moments of self-care, like having a great coffee, taking a stretch break, looking outside, calling a friend, even if you're in the middle of doing an errand or laundry or picking up your child, right? Recognizing these small moments of taking care of yourself or just actually doing nothing for a few moments to catch your breath are so important for us to have that light and bring it forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's even just the mindset shift there from caring for myself, even if it's just for 2 minutes, is selfish and pushing me off course and preventing me from doing 2 minutes of something constructive, to viewing that as something not only that we deserve because we're human, but also that is essential fuel for us to be able to show up for others. And one other just very practical strategy that I want to share, because you mentioned lists. We all have to-do lists, but often we don't put everything that we need on our to-do list, especially when it comes to our caregiver duties, and even like the little things, because the little things add up. And a practice that I started for myself a number of years ago, and now what I always challenge my clients to do when they come to me and they're like, there's just not enough time, I don't know, is put everything on the list and then take things off. And so, because asking yourself, again, this goes back to accepting the reality. If you say yes to any one of these things, you're saying no to something else because you just told me there is not enough time. And again, we need to sleep, we need to eat, we need to put on our oxygen mask so that we can do the other things. And yes, there's going to be things that we can lean on our community for, and there's going to be things that just aren't going to happen. And so it's interesting, whenever people come to me with a list like that, I say, can anything come off? And they say no. And then we go one by one down the list. And I say, do that really have to happen? Or at least, does that really have to happen now or in the next week? And they say yes. And I go, does it really? Sometimes they say yes again. What will happen if it doesn't? Then the answer might change around that point, especially if we're thinking about, is this somehow really going to abrogate one of the core values here or not? And so I think that challenging yourself to ask yourself twice, does this really have to happen? And then what will happen if it doesn't, might free you up to get some of that stuff off the list in general, at least for the time being. So let's end with a scenario here to help concretize all of this for our listeners. Robbie, imagine that one of your friends or colleagues comes to you and shares that or demonstrates that they're experiencing caregiver burnout, whether or not they label it as such, because often we don't even recognize when that's the case. What would you want them to know in that moment?
So interesting. When some of my colleagues heard that we were doing this podcast, they were like, I can't wait to hear your advice. So it's a real life scenario. I think what I want them to know in that moment is that they've done something great for themselves already by sharing it. Saying it out loud is one of the first steps to taking care of your own self, your physical, mental, emotional well-being. And I think if you're feeling that way and being brave enough to voice it to a friend or a colleague or your partner, seek professional help. Really make sure that you're talking with someone who can help you with your own feelings, and then also seek help from your community. We talked about how the different circles of community can be there to support you. But I think when we're talking about lawyers, as we are today, sometimes we have to raise our hand and say, I'm about to go over my edge of ability. I have too much on my plate professionally. Raise your hand. It's better to ask for help now than to seek forgiveness for either missing a deadline or making a mistake. And the same goes true in your personal world, right? When you're kind of feel yourself, and we all have those moments when we're feeling ourselves getting for the edge, before you're looking over the edge of the precipice is the time to raise your hand and ask for help.
Yeah.
So I think we might all come at that a little bit differently. Jordana and I are certainly at different stages of our parenting, caregiving stages. So Jordana, I'm just curious, what kind of advice would you give me when I come to you and I say my children, my work, my family, my friends, it's all just too much. I'm really frustrated. I'm almost at my wit's end. I'm looking over that precipice. What should I do?
Yeah, I think two things. One, I would say, because I would kind of try to get out in front of something that I know prevents so many people from doing anything differently, is just because you've survived thus far and gotten as much as you've done thus far, doesn't mean that you need to keep approaching things in the same way in order to do just as well. And in fact, most likely if you approach it in a slightly different way, again, it's going to feel counterintuitive. You are going to be so much happier with the outcome. And this just goes back to the difference, again, between the perfectionism, big picture, perfection seeking. And I think so many of us, especially lawyers, believe that if it doesn't hurt, it's not working. If we're not burning the candle at both ends, we're not being productive. If we're not pushing ourselves to our breaking point, we're not doing enough, because that's how we've been operating for so long, and with mostly good results. And what we don't realize is that we've actually gotten these good results despite that run yourself into the ground, blame and shame yourself into producing more approach. And that if we shift and treat ourselves with more self-compassion and recognize that taking a step back and dropping some things will enable us to show up more fully for the things that matter the most right now, we're actually going to be providing more overall in producing the most important stuff overall in all of the realms that we care about. So that would be a first thing. And then the second thing, because you mentioned self-care earlier, and I just know so many lawyers that either they think that self-care is taboo and they can't do it, or they turn it into a should. So I just want to be really clear that when we say self-care, we don't mean going to the gym in the morning or meditating for 20 minutes every day or any other prescriptive measure necessarily. And what I hope you take away is just honestly asking yourself, what do I really need in this moment? What could I do to fill up my cup and feel a little bit more human and whole in this moment? And it might totally vary. Like it might be waking up early and going to the gym to get your endorphins going, or it could be sleeping, or it could just be waking up and allowing yourself to sit in silence and have a nice cup of coffee. But actually taking the shoulds out of it and just asking, what can I do for me in this moment? And that is so powerful and so out of character for so many of us. And so I would just love to put that out there for people to noodle on.
Well, with that, as opposed to saying you should stay tuned for Nancy Batterman, who is a member of the Deputy General Counsel at the New York City's Department of Housing Preservation and Development and a member of the Mindfulness and Wellbeing Committee. Instead of saying you should stay tuned and listen to her, I'm going to say I hope you stay tuned and listen to her as she leads us in a self-compassion exercise. Thank you so much, Jordana. Thank you so much to the City Bar. This has been a great conversation, and we'll see you soon.
My pleasure, Robbie. And thank you. And thank you to our listeners for taking this time for yourselves today. I hope you found it valuable and that it's inspired you to do something to fill up your cup in whatever way that means for you.
Welcome, everybody. This practice is the self-compassion break, which comes from the Mindful Self-Compassion curriculum developed by Kristen Neff and Chris Germer. It's about a 5-minute practice when we first learn it, but the encouragement is then to begin practicing it briefly in your life, on the spot, whenever you need it. Self-compassion is responding to our own suffering in the caring way we would respond to a dear friend or a child who's struggling. This self-compassion break is designed in 3 stages to directly experience the 3 components of self-compassion. The first is mindfulness, the second is common humanity, and the third is kindness. And each stage will last about a minute. So let's try this out together. I first invite you to take a few deep breaths and settle into your own body. And now, bring to mind a situation in your life that is causing you stress. When first learning this practice, it is best if you can choose a problem that's in the mild to moderate range, so that we can gradually develop this quality of self-compassion. Bringing this difficulty to life in your experience right now. Where do you feel it in the body? Noticing and feeling any discomfort in your body. Being present with the sensations as they arise in your body. And with this difficulty present, now try saying to yourself slowly, this is a moment of struggle. That's mindfulness, the first component of self-compassion. It's recognizing the struggle while we're struggling, validating how we feel while we're experiencing it. We can also say to ourselves, this hurts, or ouch, or this is stressful. With these phrases, we can sense what it's like for someone to experience this feeling, and we'll be acknowledging that it's tough. The second stage of the self-compassion break is trying to say to yourself that struggle is a part of life. That's the common humanity component. Other options is for you to say to yourself, I'm not alone, or we all struggle in our lives, or many other people struggle like this, just like me. This is how it feels when a person struggles in this way, sensing right through your feeling what others feel. Feel through your feeling what they may feel. And in this way, sensing this feeling as not just your own, but as your deep connection to many other people throughout the world. And now for the third stage of the self-compassion break, experimenting with offering yourself a simple gesture of a soothing touch. One option is placing your hand over your heart, or trying another gesture of soothing touch of your choice somewhere on your body. Perhaps your lap, putting your hands there, or even giving yourself a hug and feeling the warmth and gentle touch that these gestures provide. And while engaging in this gesture, try saying to yourself, may I be kind to myself, or may I give myself what I need. This is kindness, the third component of self-compassion. Some other options of what you could say to yourself are, may I accept myself as I am, or if you're not quite ready to go there yet, may I begin to accept myself as I am. May I forgive myself. May I be patient with myself. Perhaps there are particular words of kindness and support that you need to hear in this very difficult situation. Offer yourself what you need. What simple message might be a caring response? And if you're having difficulty finding the right words, imagine that a dear friend or loved one is having the same problem as you. What would you say to this person? What simple message would you like to deliver to your friend, heart to heart? And now see if you can offer the same message to yourself. Congratulations, you've now practiced the self-compassion break. I invite you to continue experimenting with this practice and becoming familiar with it, so that the next time you are struggling or feeling stressed out, you can take that sacred pause and acknowledge what you are experiencing with the 3 stages of the self-compassion break. First, acknowledging what you are experiencing with mindfulness. Ouch, this hurts. Second, moving from isolation to connection by reminding yourself, I am not alone in this struggle. And finally, saying to yourself something like, may I be kind to myself. Whenever you notice you're struggling, it becomes an opportunity to practice self-compassion. In closing, I would like to share a poem by Mark Nepo called Adrift. I love this poem deeply because it so beautifully expresses the dualities we all experience in life, the beauty and the ugliness, the happiness and the sorrow, and how each needs the other to really be themselves. Everything is beautiful, and I am so sad. This is how the heart makes a duet of wonder and grief. The light spraying through the lace of the fern is as delicate as the fibers of memory forming their web around the knot in my throat. The breeze makes the birds move from branch to branch, as this ache makes me look for those I've lost in the next room, in the next song, in the laugh of the next stranger. In the very center, under it all, what we have that no one can take away and all that we've lost face each other. It is there that I'm adrift, feeling punctured by a holiness that exists inside everything. I am so sad, and everything is beautiful. Thank you for your practice.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the New York City Bar Association podcast. Opinions expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the City Bar. If you enjoy this podcast, please like and subscribe wherever you listen. Find more City Bar podcasts on Apple, Spotify, YouTube Music, iHeart, or at our website at www.nycbar.org/podcasts. Be sure to check out This Lawyer's Life, a professional development podcast where we talk with lawyers about seizing opportunities, learning lessons the hard way, and about what makes them tick. And don't miss Building Belonging, a podcast that embraces authentic conversations about DEIB solutions by amplifying the most marginalized voices in the legal industry and exploring spaces others dare not. This podcast was produced and edited by Eli Cohen.